Okay. Introduce yourself and tell us what you're running for and why you're running.
I'm Craig McMichael. I'm running for U.S. Congress, District 8. The main reason I'm running is I feel our government has lost sense of what the Constitution means, what it stands for. I think a lot of our politicians no longer discuss it. We have a lot of bills that go through that are unconstitutional, in my opinion, and we have political leaders who use money to confuse the people about what they're doing, and it's about their next election and their power. And they gain their power through the size and scope of government. And so my vision is what I call the McMichael idea of constitutional freedom. And it's not about Craig McMichael, it's about our Constitution and our founding documents and what they stood for. What I spent so much time in the Marine Corps fighting for is it's a dream of liberty and freedom. And when somebody finds liberty and freedom in their heart and they open up to it, it's amazing the conversion that you see inside them when they no longer depend on someone else to take care of them. And you see this with young teenagers when they find a job and they start making their own money. And you can find this with adults that are dependent on the government system. And so what I want to do is educate people on their liberties and freedoms, spread democracy, talk about the Constitution daily, enforce our laws constitutionally, federally and at the state and local levels, and then allow people to carry something in their hearts that will be here long after everybody in this room is gone. Because one day we will all be gone. We'll no longer be here, and it's going to take an idea, because historically, when people fought for a king, they fought out of fear. When people fought for their own freedom and liberty, they fought for themselves. And so this is what I think we need to remind people, is that you can stand up and fight for yourself again, and the only weapon you need in this fight is the Constitution. It provides you everything you need to beat this battle we're having against our government. And so my response is to run against Kevin Brady, who I think is 16 years, has proven with a voting record that shows he supports larger and larger government. And I think when we beat him, we can send a message to the rest of the country that it's time for a change, and that it is not impossible to win these elections. If you're passionate and you understand the Constitution and you have the ability to speak, you can do this. And this is where I'm at. And I thank you for your time tonight.
Okay. All right, well, what we'll do is go around the room with our questions, and we'll start off. Larry, are you ready?
Would you rather not see this?
I'm okay, Sam. I need to practice all these little intricates of debates.
On your questionnaire, source of income, you're a network engineer. Could you elaborate on that a little bit? How long you've done that? Is that what you set out to do when you were in college? Little background in that respect.
Yeah, computers started for me at a young age. My parents bought an Apple IIe, and nobody knew how to use it, so they gave it to me in my room. And it turned out to be a blessing for me, because it's what occupied my time. Computers became my hobby. In the Marine Corps, when I started out as a radio operator. They asked for volunteers, and nobody ever volunteered, but I was bored, and I volunteered one day. And I got assigned to the unit that was going to implement the first Windows 95 network on the base in Hawaii. From there, I did such a good job, they sent me to other schools, and I ended up flying around the world developing computer networks for the government.
What year was that, or about what year?
That I flew around?
Yeah.
96 was the Hawaii year when I first started. 1996
That's
when I first started on computers, and I got out of the Marine Corps in 2006. Getting out of the Marine Corps, naturally, doing what I did, I searched for a computer job. And I found a consultant firm here in Houston, and that's what I do. I design, develop, and maintain computer networks. Once they're in place, it even gets down to the level of, today I helped a secretary with her printer because she couldn't print, which seems mundane, but I always say if everybody knew how to do that, I wouldn't have a job. And I enjoy the ability of finding a task and being able to fix it. And so computers has always been fun for me, because every day the job is unique. And it's different, and I don't know if I'm the kind of guy that could sit in a cubicle and type the same piece of paper every single day.
Would being a United States representative be an advance in income over what you're doing now?
It would be an advance of income over what I'm doing now. They make a little more than I do. I don't believe this is about money or power. And actually, I've talked to people about offering some of my salary to the Wounded Warrior Project to show that I need enough money for my family to maintain their current lifestyle. What I'm trying to do is to better my country, and it's not for me.
In your questionnaire, on answer number 9, briefly explain your position on the federal role in education and your thoughts about Common Core. Part of your answer was DOE should be closed. What about Common Core? Let's say we can't get that closed soon enough. What would you do about stopping Common Core?
I think a lot of federal agencies have overstepped their boundaries. A lot of people don't know the Department of Education was set up to fund student lunches. And now it's gotten where they're dictating how we teach our children. Who better in a community than the parents that are involved in the community to decide how their children should learn? I think federally, as a U.S. representative, what you could do, and I don't understand why they don't attempt this now, is cut funding. If you don't agree with Common Core and you want to get rid of it and you can't stop the Department of Education, you can cut their funding. You control funding for the government. Congress has surrendered a lot of their powers because they don't have men and women that are willing to stand up and fight for them. And we need to understand the Constitution, quantify it in a sense where our neighbors understand it and the people we live with and work with. But Common Core is definitely an issue. There's no way anybody in Washington should be teaching my kid what they want them to learn over what I want them to learn.
How would you go about that? Are you aware of people who are other legislators who are against that and forming a coalition to do something about it? I mean, it's one thing to say something, but what actions do you think you could take with other congressmen that are in there to make that change?
I'm going to be uniquely different than most elected representatives in this sense of when you're not worried about your next election and you're actually worried about the Constitution and the government. Here's my thought. Once you win one of these primaries or elections, money starts funneling in from all over the place. I'm going to use the campaign money that's coming in to help fund other people like me around the country to get rid of the congressmen that should not be congressmen.
Mm-hmm.
There's some of them on my list already. The problem is we have to find candidates that we can put in those offices. But the hardest part of my campaign was the first 9 months, building the foundation of what I have and raising the funds that I've raised. But once people are giving all that money to me, it makes sense because federally I'm allowed to donate that money to anybody else for a campaign.
So do you is there a number of allies out there? Give me a number that you think would side with you.
I think right now in the House we have about 48 strong Tea Party representatives.
Mm-hmm.
Now, without going and meeting everybody, I couldn't give you a good number of, I know this guy would work with us. I do believe Senator Cruz proved a single fact that a lot of those guys, when you put a strong leader in the room, will follow them.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is my idea, is let's do that.
Okay, James?
Well, I'm going to use your background in the Marine Corps for a question. Of course, being a U.S. Congressman, you'll have to work with budgeting and, of course, legislation dealing with what our country does internationally. Now, we know under the current president, he's laughingly referred to as leading from behind. And we've seen the result of it. As a matter of fact, it's very likely we'll have to lose lives of our soldiers, sailors, and Marines in Iran because of what's going on. But my question is, considering among conservatives, there is a streak of conservatives that basically think we should just all come home, pull up stakes, and, I don't know, put a wall around the country and let the rest of the world fend for itself. So my question is, what do you feel will be your obligation, just from your perspective, not what the rest of Congress does, but from your perspective, what should our country do internationally with regard to our interests, and what would be the basis for our getting involved in any military conflict other than an outright invasion? When should we get involved? Other than that, of course, we should.
And I may disagree with you a little on this.
That's fine.
I'm a
That's fine.
strong believer in what the Constitution says.
Yeah.
The federal government was formed to protect the sovereign power of the United States of America.
Mhm.
I see a lot of conflicts currently and historically that we entered into that we had no business being involved in. To me, if it's someone's civil war, the same way we wouldn't want another nation getting involved in our civil war, I don't expect that we should get involved in
Do you
theirs.
remember our first naval conflict after the War for Independence? It dealt with terrorists.
1803.
Our first
The
run up
Barbary
against
Pirates?
jihadists.
Barbary Pirates.
Yes. Was that something that you would support? A similar activity? That's kind of like what we're doing now.
That's a bit different because we didn't actually try to modify the government's.
Nation building. Understand that.
And this is where I found it when I got sent overseas and
Mhm.
was given a piece of paper that I couldn't shoot at somebody unless they fired at me.
Yeah, I know.
I didn't
Yeah.
understand this. I was not trained to be a police officer. I was trained to be a United States Marine. And I think our men and women are put in bad situations. And so it's easy for other men and women who are elected leaders who have never been involved in war and their kids are not in danger to send someone else off to fight. And so this is why I think military members in elected offices are important, because people who have been there understand that if you make that decision to go to war, it needs to be because you're going to go to war, because the sovereign power of the United States of America is in danger and men and women are going to die. And we need to protect those lives at all costs, because there's nothing more important than American life.
Only with the threat of invasion, not necessarily to pursue our national interests.
And see,
Like the Middle East, should we have any involvement there?
we could do involvement
Or not?
without having troops on the ground. You could do involvement through political, you could do sanctions, you could pump some money into the countries.
But if that doesn't work, then we did our best.
Look,
Whatever happens,
I have a
happens.
hard time sending young American men and women to die
Sure.
because some other country can't solve their own political problems. If they're not a threat to the everyday citizens of this nation, I
Uh-huh.
don't see why they're a threat enough.
What if
for us.
Iran attacks Israel? Should we just do nothing?
No, they're not invading us, but they are
Not
attacking
us.
our allies. And this
Yeah.
is where World War I and II come in handy, because you can look at it and see there are some points where you have aggressors in the world, where they're Saddam Hussein going into Kuwait. We did the right thing. We removed the army from Kuwait.
Right.
We left Iraq alone because we went to save Kuwait. Iran, if they bombed Israel, then we need to deal with that. Ultimately, you would like to stop them before they had the capability of providing
That's
that
not
bomb.
going to happen. We
Well,
know that.
well, it would have happened if we had the right people
Yeah,
in the
you're
right
right.
place for the past 10
You're
years.
right.
I think you have to remember to be on the side of caution, because sometimes you get into a war with good intentions and it's hard getting out of it. And Afghanistan, it's proof in the pudding. I was one of the first ground troops in Afghanistan back in 2001. We went in November of 2001. And I have friends that are in the Marine Corps that are still serving and going over there. And we always
me
ask,
too.
why? Why are they still going? What is our mission inside that country? Because as soon as we leave, it's going to go back to complete turmoil. So
Yep.
I think the military is important. National defense is important. I believe in the theory of peace through power. You display power, what Reagan did with the Cold War. But I don't believe that we need to keep being the police force of the world. I'm not even anti what we did in Bosnia, because we didn't put utilized the UN. We didn't put a lot of troops in the ground.
Real quickly before we move on, should we maintain our nuclear arsenal and or
Yes.
increase it?
Yes, we should
Okay.
maintain our nuclear arsenal.
All right, thank you.
Anybody that thinks otherwise is setting themselves up for failure.
Yes.
Dale?
Okay, Dr. Ron Paul was known in Congress as Dr. No, because he found so much that came across the legislature across Congress that he disagreed with. And how would you compare yourself with Dr. Ron Paul? Do you think that the things that he found issue with and voted no on, that you would likewise find issue with and vote no on? Or?
I think there are a lot of things that he was against that I'm against, because they're against the Constitution. I think if you look at the 18 enumerated powers the federal government's supposed to have, almost every bill they pass violates that.
So you would vote no on most bills?
I wouldn't mind being called a candidate no. I think people should expect it, because if we don't have people that stand up and say no every once in a while, then this is where we get. We get to a government that spends $3.8 trillion a year. The problem is you have to be able to vote no and then explain to people why you're voting no. And this is the difficult task that we have to learn to do, because what they'll do is they'll put a bill where it's defense spending, and if you don't support it, they'll say, well, you don't support the troops. Well, I support
Right.
the troops. I don't support the abortion funding that was tacked onto the back of it. And so we need to learn to get good people that are involved in campaigns and elections, that are involved in the communities, that understand what is going on, and get them active again. We need to re-engage the American people in politics, because if people don't stand up and take ownership of this country again, it's going to fall. And that's what I'm trying to convince people to do, that I'm one man, I can only do so much. If I get elected and go to Washington, I can vote no for every bill, but it doesn't do anything if we don't start building a coalition of sending more like-minded individuals to that office.
Okay.
Well, I would rather no be the default and let you explain why you find something to vote yes for. As conservatives, we battle an invisible ideological enemy whose method is to overwhelm the system. I mean, we've heard that Howard Clarendon Pivot and other things. You listen to Glenn Beck, you hear about overwhelming, and we see all those things. And our problems have snowballed to the point where they exceed individual issues. Our real problem is widespread corruption, and especially in Washington, D.C. So, I'd like to see something like what they call the 28th Amendment. Congress makes no rule that doesn't apply to them, just like it does everybody else. So how can something like that be accomplished? And would it be a bill, or would it be an amendment, or would it be House rules? And what could you do to get something like that moving?
There's a few bills like that I like. I would throw term limits in with that. People argue against term limits. I think constitutionally, originally, there were no term limits. And people saw the dangers of Roosevelt after he served in office. So Congress passed presidential term limits. I think with the level of corruption and greed that is in Washington now, you'll never pass that at a federal level. You'll never pass term limits, and you'll never pass a law that requires them to hold themselves accountable to their own actions. They're so used to breaking the law, having a closed-door meeting, and then nothing happens about it. And so what we need to do is, as we're building this coalition of people, we need to do what I believe can be done from the states. You work on a 28th Amendment, and you do it from the state level. And you get a lot of people locally, because then Washington can't turn it down. It's going to take a lot of work, but to save this country, we have to add some amendments, and I'm a big fan of removing some of them. The 17th Amendment could go.
Sure.
I wouldn't have a problem. I'm not a fan of the 16th Amendment. I actually think it violates our 4th Amendment against illegal search and seizure. But until we get the populace engaged, and I believe they're not engaged because they have representatives that are corrupt, and so they've given up. And so my idea is to put good young patriots, men and women, to stand up in front of them and say, I'm giving you an option. I'm giving you something other than a politician to vote for. You send me to Washington, and I'll do what needs to be done.
Running for office, obviously you have to convince the voters that you're gonna do something better than what's being done. And so with that, the premise, explain what you can do that has not been done.
I can do something easy that hasn't been done in a long time. It's simple. It's called telling the truth. I think it's something our politicians miss. And I think it's something people can see. When you put somebody in front of you and you talk to them, transparency is easy to notice. When somebody's telling you the truth, when they're being honest with you, when they're opening their soul as a man or woman and telling you how they feel, you can see it. I spoke last night, and when I was done, I had a gentleman that came up and said, when you walked in the room, I looked at you and said, there's no way this kid knows enough or has the ability to be a U.S. congressman. And when you were done, I had to come over and shake your hand, because I don't know if I'll ever get the chance to meet you again, but I'm going to do everything it takes to get you elected. It's that kind of truth that people are seeing, and it's that passion and inspiration that will bring people out to vote, that will allow us, not me, because this is not about me, this will allow us as good constitutionalists to make a change in this country. Because 1 man, 5 men, 10 men, we're not going to be able to do anything. We need an army of people who agree with what we agree with to really impose some change. And that, to me, is the difference between me and a lot of the politicians that we currently have. Is they're too scared to stand up and tell you the truth, because when they tell you honestly what they think, you vote them out of office. But it's because they don't agree constitutionally with us.
How did you get your knowledge about the Constitution?
I read. It was always free to read, and I spent a lot of time on Navy ships, a lot of time in Iraq and Afghanistan, and I had books. I've always had a Constitution that I like to read. The founding documents, they were, what amazes me is they're so simple, and I think sometimes they're written so simple that people misinterpret them, but I think the founders were genius, because they wrote those documents so that any citizen could read it and understand it. And I think that's what we need to explain to people again, is it's all there, you just have to read it.
What's your opinion of, we'll go on to guns here. What's your opinion of gun-free zones? Should they be allowed? And if so, where? Like schools, libraries, government buildings?
I think a private business should be able to declare themselves a gun-free zone. Because I'm a big believer that the founders, when they wrote Life, Liberty, and Pursuit of Happiness, it originally was life, liberty, and property. And your pursuit of happiness was your property. That was your kingdom. That's where you made all the rules. And the consequence of that would be people that were against you, if they didn't like your decision, wouldn't go to your business. You would go out of business. Public lands, no. The Second Amendment's very clear. Your right to own and bear arms should not be infringed. I'm a fan of open carry. I think if you pass the concealed handgun license and you clear the checks that the government and state wants to set up for you, you should be able to carry a gun. I
How
also,
about in a stadium? Like at a
Movie theater.
public university? Well, that's private business, but at a public university.
now I do think okay, you talk about schools and football stadiums, maybe not open carried in those, but you should be able to concealed carry in those areas. At any time as an American citizen, you should have the right to defend yourself, as long as you're a good, honest, law-abiding citizen. It's hard to go back and find a story of a good citizen that took a gun out and started killing people. It's always somebody who was not supposed to have the gun anyways. And statistics show time and time again that every time you open up concealed handgun laws, that violent crimes go down. And so we need to face reality and stop hiding behind you're going to hurt the kids.
Yes or no, do you believe the Second Amendment grants an individual right or a militia right?
I believe it grants an individual right, but I also believe it talks about the right for a militia inside the state. But the militia was formed from the individuals.
Okay.
Let's talk just a minute about illegals. Of course, we've had some people tell us, not for this office, that we should just round them all up and send them back. And I guess what they don't realize is the minute we start pushing people back across the border, say to Mexico, we'll see Mexico secure their border like we've never secured our border. In other words, they just won't take them. And when we deport someone now, it's with the permission of the country that we're sending it to. So my question is, as a legislator, how would you go about dealing with the problem that we have, other than closing the border? I think we all, unless you disagree with that, I think we all would require that. But let's say the border's closed, there's no more influx. What do we do with the 10 to 20 or however many million there are here? How do we handle that?
Okay? And